Hello, and thanks for tuning in to this discussion on faith, learning, and orthodoxy. I'm Morgan Fedesatri, the managing editor of the CCCU's Advanced Magazine. For all of you listening who are like, I can never get the number of C's right, it happens even to us who have been, I've been at the CCCU for almost 10 years now. Still can't get it right the first time, so you're not alone. If you've checked out some of our recent issues of Advance, you'll know that we are exploring a central pillar of Christian higher education, which is the integration of Christian faith with the academic learning experience. This is really core to what our institutions do. We have articles exploring what exactly that is, what it looks like in practice, why it's valuable not just for students, but for everyone on and off campus. So I self-indulgent plug, I'd really encourage you to check those out when you get a chance after you finish listening to this great conversation we are going to have today, where we will explore the impact of orthodoxy. Now, not capital O Orthodox as an Orthodox church, but what we might call colloquially right thinking. That is like the doctrine defined by, say, the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creeds, and how these doctrines, this orthodoxy, relates to faith and learning integration. With over 185 members around the world, the CCCU's membership encompasses dozens of Christian denominations, each of which holds to some of these central Orthodox beliefs, say the divinity and humanity of Christ, for example. But they might have different interpretations on other things. And then you add in the academic learning environment, where students and faculty are constantly exploring tough questions, exchanging and questioning each other's opinions, learning new information and perspectives, and it creates ample opportunities for theological differences within the campus community. So today I want to introduce this panel who's here to discuss some different aspects of this topic with us. First, we have Dr. Vincent Bacot, professor of theology and the director of the Center for Applied Christian Ethics at Wheaton College in Illinois. He's the author of several books, including Reckoning with Race and Performing the Good News in Search of a Better Evangelical Theology, as well as The Political Disciple, A Theology of Public Life. He's also contributed to books including Cultural Engagement, A Crash Course in Contemporary Issues, The Church's Social Responsibility, and Black Scholars in White Spaces. He serves as a senior fellow for the Trinity Forum and a fellow for the Center for Public Justice. He previously has served as an assistant theology editor for Christianity Today and as a columnist for Comment. He's also been published in such places as Books and Culture, Think Christian, the Journal of Markets and Morality, Christian Scholars Review, Urban Mission, and the Journal for Christian Theological Research, among others. Next, we have Dr. Louise Wong. She serves at Azusa Pacific University in California in a variety of roles, including interim dean and associate professor in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, the director of both the Center for Research in Science and the Environmental Studies program at APU, and as a faculty fellow in the Honors College. Her area of teaching and research lies in environmental stewardship and sustainability. She actually holds 2 U.S. patents connected to her research. She is an inducted fellow of the American Science Affiliation and has received numerous grants for her work, including as a participant in the Bridging the Two Cultures of Science and Humanities program, which is a program out of the Scholarship in Christianity in Oxford, which is the CCCU's UK subsidiary. And her bio on the APU website notes that inside and outside the classroom, she strives to equip students in cultivating a global Christian worldview through learning and appreciating science, which, as a science nerd, I personally really appreciate. And then rounding out our group is Dr. Beck Taylor. He has served as president of Samford University in Alabama since the summer of 2021. He has also served as a dean and professor of economics at Samford's Brock School of Business earlier in his career. Prior to starting as president at Samford, he served as president of Whitworth University in Washington from 2010 to 2021, which, full disclosure, his first year there was my senior year as an undergraduate there. He also has experience as an associate dean for research and faculty development at Baylor University, so he's been on CCCU campuses in many different parts of the country. He's a published scholar whose research has been cited in testimony given before such groups as Congress and the Federal Trade Commission. And as Samford's president, he has been leading the charge in the development of the university's strategic plan, which they call Fidelitas, Faith and Future. which casts a vision for reinforcing and strengthening Samford as a leading national, comprehensive, Christ-centered institution of higher learning. So as you can see, we have a great lineup of panelists today. So we're going to dive right in with our first question, which I will direct first to you, Dr. Baycoat, but we're going to open up the floor for everyone to respond to after that initial response. So I'm going to go out on a limb here, and you can correct me if I'm wrong in your answers, but I think we all believe that an understanding of Orthodoxy is important in the development and maturation of Christians' faith. So, Dr. Baycoat, I'm wondering, when you think about the work of Christian higher education, your work as a professor, how does Orthodoxy factor in? In other words, do you think is a chief goal of Christian college education to give students a good foundation in Christian doctrine and practice, or is there more to the faith-integrated learning experience than that?
Thanks for that question. Here's how I would put it. The first question to ask is, how is each institution understanding or articulating what their mission is? Because I think on the basis of what their mission is, that's going to give us an indication of what kind of formation they're thinking about. Because to the extent that the mission is very clearly about forming certain kinds of Christian persons, then something is informing your idea of what Christian is. And so whatever that something is going to be some version of Orthodoxy. So it may be as basic as the Nicene Creed, it may be as particular as, a certain denomination's views. So if that's what we're talking about, it's a CCCU conversation we're having here. I'd say most of the schools, to some degree, want Orthodoxy to inform what they're doing in terms of their education. And they want that to be something that shows up throughout everything that they're doing in the education. But one of the questions you have to ask is, well, how are they thinking about the kind of students that they have? So are you thinking that all of your students here are Christian students? If all your students are Christian students, then, or at least they tell you that they're Christian students, then I think we're in a situation where you're thinking about, they know that they have come to a particular kind of place, or at least they have a general idea. And so part of what people are expecting out of the education, and was articulated, at the beginning of the year, convocations, orientation, all these types of things, is that this is a particular kind of place where we are taking the Christian faith seriously, and that means, and then they'll fill in the blank for what that means. And whatever that means, it is going to be informed by at least Nicene versions of the faith, but it could be much more particular. And however we're thinking about that, then we are thinking about Orthodoxy in terms of right belief or proper belief. Depending upon what kind of lifestyle expectations you have for students, that's going to play a role in how you're thinking about the role of Orthodoxy. Is it role of Orthodoxy mainly about, hey, here's what we are, so you know who we are. So when you come into the classroom, if you're a Christian, if you're not a Christian, then maybe you're not so sure what you think about this stuff, but you were at a Christian school and Christian means something. And to the extent that that's clearly articulated, then what people know that they are getting into, what they are agreeing to, is being in an educational environment where, however you're thinking about the broad range of disciplines, that there is some way that Christian belief is informing and is engaged with those various disciplines. But again, I think it's going to vary depending upon what the institution is, what the history of the institution is, what peaks and valleys the institution has had, depending on what's going on in society. What vocabulary are you using? For example, does Orthodoxy mean that people are going to use the word evangelical in their institution? Well, we all know that right now that really depends, doesn't it? But in other places, people are saying, yes, we're still going to use the word in spite of the difficulties with that. So all of those things, I think, wind up having to get parsed for the institution. But to the extent that they are calling themselves Christian institutions, something about Christian is going to be defined, is going to be articulated, and it's at least presented as what the aspirations are of the institution. And so in that case, then they are taking Orthodoxy with some kind of seriousness. And I think when people are, assessing different Christian institutions, I do think people need to ask, what is the goal of this institution? Is the goal of this institution to form pastors? Everybody is going to be forming pastors, or you're some part of a church ministry or something, then the education should reflect that. But if you're talking about wanting to provide an education where people encounter the Christian faith through the various disciplines, then that's going to be a very different thing, right? Because you want people to experience and encounter a way of thinking about business, law, art, etc., with the fact that there's some lens of Christian faith on that. That lens is going to vary. I mean, if you're a Calvinist, it might different than if you're Wesleyan, than if you're an Anglican, if you're a Mennonite, etc. So those things are going to inform what's happening. But there is going to be that encounter with that in an institution where your constituency is Christians plus the broader public. If it's people who are self-selecting because they're identifying as Christians, then I think you're going to have a greater particularity. But that particularity isn't going to be the same. It's going to vary depending upon the history, the mission, the identity of the institution. A lot more things I can say about that, but that's how I'll start it.
A great start, I'd say.
I really appreciate the underscoring of the institutional identity, vision, and mission, because I think that can vary. If there's an open enrollment campus, the focus would be different than one that is not. And I'm seeing faith integration being key in those kind of campuses, how one's faith enhances one's discipline and vice versa. And as a result, like what was mentioned, then students from different traditions can experience the Christian faith and value in a very academic way. So as a result, the orthodoxy might not be presented in just a theoretical, doctrinal way, but it is actually expressed in a very rich way. And if the Christian faith is a very rich, robust faith, then I believe that in the information and the knowledge and the classes that we teach, it would just penetrate through the ways we convey those information. And I teach science, so I try to really connect the dots for the students and bring them to question why did God design a certain chemical a certain way, and as a result, they can see how the faith informs the science, and the science informs the faith. And I think at the end, I'm praying and hopeful that it will be a very rich transformation. And I think that is what I hope for in a Christian education.
I certainly agree with my colleagues. I too began to answer or think about this question in the sense of institutional identity. I think that's a good place to start. We know that our institutions, CCCU institutions, were founded by the church and for the church, but we are not churches. And I say that because I think it's important to realize that we Christians have typically depended upon churches or groups of churches, like denominations, to be the primary entities in and through which theological standards are created and sustained. That is the set of teachings that have been sustained and generally agreed upon throughout the history of the church. That is what defines orthodoxy. And even the term orthodoxy can be a contested notion or contested idea on our campuses. For example, we know in a very practical sense, we know that throughout the history of the church, issues of human sexuality were not up for debate. Christian scholars and theologians, practitioners from the vast mainstream of Christianity were of one mind about same-sex activity. And homosexuality has always been considered contrary to God's design for human flourishing. It's really only been, say, in the last maybe generously 40 to 50 years that there's been a concerted effort to make more heterodox viewpoints around same-sex relationships more mainstream. I say all that simply to make the point that to the extent that we as Christ-centered institutions of higher learning are being brought now into these debates, there may have been debates in the past that we would have eschewed or not paid a lot of attention to, but as these debates have kind of been focused on our campuses, this has happened at Samford, certainly. And to the extent that our institutional standards and beliefs are now being called into question by some, at least, I think it's very important for us to have a clear understanding, to be very clear about our institutional values and beliefs. And so to that end, a defense of orthodoxy, as we understand it, becomes increasingly important. And in as much as Christian colleges and universities find themselves in the middle of these kind of social debates and theological conflicts, I think it's loving and I think it's responsible for us to stake out where the boundaries of orthodoxy lie on our campuses so that members of our community can successfully navigate them, can navigate the terrain, and no matter which side of the boundary they may find themselves on. So I'm of the mind that it's increasingly important for us at Christ-centered colleges and universities to be thinking of issues of orthodoxy to help our communities understand where those boundaries of orthodoxy lie on our campuses, and to acknowledge that orthodoxy in and of itself is a contested idea.
One thing I'd like to add to that, just to piggyback on that, is that I think with what you just said, part of the challenge is, and importantly to emphasize in making sure that we're conveying orthodoxy, is for people to understand that the orthopraxy that goes alongside of that in terms of how orthodoxy is articulated, how it's displayed, how it's engaged with others who are in tension with it, that it's not being done in ways that are giving all the confirmation bias that if you care about orthodoxy, it means you're going to be me. If you care about orthodoxy, it means that you're really thinking about who you keep out, all these types of things. I think it's important for people to see that orthodoxy isn't a commitment to orthodoxy, isn't a commitment to sort of the worst kinds of things that you see in terms of Christians behaving badly towards people with whom they might have tension or disagreement. Because a lot of times the way things get negotiated is somebody's had a bad experience, that what orthodoxy is connected to that. And orthodoxy meant somebody was mistreated, somebody was spoken to a certain way. And then people presume that orthodoxy must entail a certain kind of social negativity towards people with whom one disagrees. And I think it's very important for people to understand that orthodoxy does not guarantee a particular ethic in somebody's practice, unless we're making clear that orthodoxy ought to be entailing a kind of, if you will, second grace commandment expression towards others in terms of the way that we express what we are talking about as right belief.
I think that's a really good point. And I think that the way we live out our commitments to orthodoxy are just as important as our stands for orthodoxy. In particular, the way we may treat people who disagree with our particular perspectives, whether they be employees or students or external constituencies, the way that we, in a very grace-filled way, engage in orthopraxy, as you said, and live out our commitments to orthodoxy, I think say just as much about us as image bearers of Christ as our stands for orthodoxy might.
That is I really like the idea of setting. We talk about this a lot at the CCCU main office in DC about how Christian colleges and universities are at this kind of unique intersection of a lot of different conflicts. We've got, this kind of faith orthodoxy thing that we're talking about. We've got all of the regular pressures of just standard higher education and kind of the unique confluence of how all these different pressures and things. And so that idea of being clear about who you are and what your goals are, what your mission is, and kind of setting those boundaries is really helpful, I think, in articulating, especially in times of conflict, but even in times of peace, as it were, who you are and what you're trying to do. And this conversation about dealing with conflict kind of leads really well into the next question, because we know that there is a lot of conflict right now. We're seeing, church denominations splitting left and right. We're seeing campus tensions rise over different things. And so, Dr. Wong, I want to direct this next question to you first, but again, we'll open it up to everyone, because I think from your perspective, and especially with that kind of unique tension of science and faith, I feel like, especially in Western Christianity, there's just like such this we feel like there has to be conflict, but that's again, like for our UK subsidiary, Scholarship and Christianity in Oxford, like that's literally what they're trying to combat, rather that it's not head to head, it's, hand in hand. We can kind of, there are differences and challenges, but that doesn't mean we have to like completely throw one out or the other and pick one. And so to start with you, from your own experience, how have you addressed issues of theological conflict that have come up within your community, whether it's, among your students in a classroom or maybe at a faculty discussion, in ways that really respect the differences of opinion that can come up in an academic setting, but still holding true to those orthodox beliefs that our institution, especially on a campus by campus basis, but like that your institution kind of holds to and has defined as being central to your mission? Thank you.
I think we live in such interesting times and being increasingly divisive. And I'm very, very keenly aware that whenever there's a disagreement happens, it's actually an opportunity for us to embody, as we said earlier, how do we really practice our charitable and intellectual humility. So when there's a conflict, I think I would first want to listen and identify that stakeholders. As you mentioned, Morgan, there are different stakeholders and parties who might approach the topic very differently. I think I would first, in the classroom, I remember when I started teaching about fossil fuel or where they came from. I had student came up after lecture and asked me, well, I heard this since growing up in the church that this is the age of the earth. So I would not engage in the classroom, but I will invite individuals to come to my office hour and I will walk them through. I will first ask them where are the hangups, where are the conflicts, and then I'll share with them, well, based on the science that we've learned so far, this is what is pointing, and I'll then share my point of view and hopefully unpack some of those. My goal wasn't to convert usually when there's a conflict, but really to listen and point out maybe where the common ground is, and that we can really understand from the Christian point of view, especially if there's any ethical considerations that we need to really consider more than on the surface. I think it is sometimes common nowadays to jump to a conclusion, especially with things that we don't agree, to have some kind of a response. But I tend to want to foster a hospitable space so that students would really feel comfortable and safe to ask questions, even questions that might seem out of the ordinary. And I think with that, we can grow in our tactical empathy and therefore practice intellectual humility. Which I feel very strongly that we have to demonstrate that as Christ followers, because I don't think the world really knows how to handle that, seems to me. And if we can show that and be an example, I think we would have accomplished quite a bit.
Yeah, I know that Professor Kwong is negotiating and arbitrating conflict at the classroom level, and those important conversations. I tend to find myself arbitrating conflict and negotiating peaceful resolutions at the institutional level. And so as I think about this question, I immediately kind of go to this perspective, and that is, we're a large campus. We have hundreds of faculty members, thousands of students. We expect that employees and students will differ in their understanding of the issues of the day. That is an expectation. And we know that faithful Christians can and do disagree on many topics of faithful living. And at Samford, we have open enrollment as well, which means that while many of our students may choose to come to Samford explicitly because they want to grow in their Christian faith, we have many students who choose Samford for other reasons than faith formation. In an academic community, and so I'm thinking primarily of the faculty here, in an academic community, we need to create spaces, I think, for dissenting and contrarian perspectives on many issues, so long as faculty members don't undermine the central theological tenets of the university. And disagreeing and undermining are two very different things, and I'll get to that in just a second. But for example, so long as we all adhere to whatever the acceptable version of mere Christianity is on our campuses, say the centrality, the lordship, the atoning work of Jesus Christ in the high view or authority of Holy Scripture. Perhaps that's our view of what orthodoxy is in its in mere Christianity sense. But what I have found is that it isn't the academic or good faith disagreements that drive conflict on our campuses. Our campuses are well suited and built really to sustain civil debates about interesting and timely issues without threatening the underlying faithfulness we have to Orthodox teaching. What drives conflict, and often it's the worst kind of conflict on our campuses, in my experience, are certain forms of bad faith activism that surround these issues. So, for example, if a faculty member were to use their position of power, their place in the classroom, to speak out on particular issues, and sometimes even issues that are far outside their academic expertise and experience, that can put students in a very vulnerable position, and it ultimately undermines the unity that binds our campuses together. And so while I certainly here at Samford want to create space and room for faculty members to hold views that might be contrary to our institutional positions, I do expect at the end of the day that faculty members will treat those institutional positions with respect, to acknowledge that they've been arrived at in principled ways, and not to try to actively undermine them in ways that violate their responsibility, that is, faculty members' responsibilities under the privilege of academic freedom.
One thing I want to add is I think we want to think about what students are told before they're coming to campus. Where do they think that they are coming, right? And for some schools, and it depends whether it's open enrollment or whether it's specifically supposed to be a Christian population, people are given a narrative about what kind of place they're going to. And sometimes the narrative that they have, I'm going to go here, but I want to make sure that I don't lose something, or that something isn't undermined. And then what can happen is the presumption may be, okay, I'm here to make sure that I get the best of this institution, but that I don't lose anything. And what can happen then is the challenge is to help students understand that even if they were, let's say they were completely right about their position, you're going into a world where everybody isn't like you. And how are we helping you to go into a world where everyone is like you, so that you can be a person of conviction, but also a person of generosity? And even if you are learning something that you disagree with, what I tell my students is, can you articulate that in a way where a person who does not agree with you sees themselves in your explanation of what you just said? Because then you're at least doing that in a good faith point of view, even if you think it's bonkers. But you at least are being, you're saying, hey, I hold certain things, and I want these, and I believe these things are true, but I'm also going to make sure that I'm respectful of views that are not my own. And so if people are, and I think the mission of the institution is a piece also plays into this. If you understand what kind of place you're supposed to be at, whether you're faculty, whether you're staff, whether you're students, what kind of place is this? What kind of discourse is here? What kind of conversations are we trying to have here? What kind of people do we want going across the stage and graduating? Who will be saying that this is who you're going to become if you're here? If people understand that, I think it has the possibility, is what I would say, and the opportunity in these polarized times to help form people that can have deep conviction, but also are okay with recognizing that there are people who don't think what I think, and that doesn't have to be a threat to me because somebody doesn't agree with me, right? And also that I can come to a place and wait, there are Christians who see things different from me, and most of them aren't a threat to me either, because a lot of times, people, depending on the circle that you're in, hey, watch out for those Arminians, or watch out for those Calvinists, or watch out for those egalitarians, watch out for those complementarians, watch out for those people that are, so scientific that, of course, they seem to love evolution, or watch out for those 6-day creation, whatever it is. if people can learn how to be respectful of other people, even if you disagree with their argument, then that's an opportunity of being in an educational space, right? And arguably, places that are committed to Christian orthodoxy, expressed out of in a view, a second greatest commandment kind of view, those places create, people that are leaving, that wherever they go in the world, you're holding a conviction doesn't require you to demand that everybody agrees with you, and you can be okay with that. And that's very, very hard right now, because there's a certain safety that there is in everybody kind of agreeing with you. And also because I think part of the noise of the environment we're in now is that some people, I mean, they're in the business of agitation and in the business of making people feel like you're going to lose it all, right? Which actually is telling people, by the way, you have no capacity for discernment. I will be your discernment. You just do what I tell you. That also works against what the whole mission of education is. I mean, why are we here in these educational spaces doing what we're doing? We're hopefully in context of Christian orthodoxy trying to form people that truly are critical thinkers.
Yeah, I think that too, and the risk of running down a rabbit hole, which we'll try to avoid. But as you're talking, it's also making me think about the reality of the incoming students that we have, that are not only are they less likely to be formed in the church and have kind of that, 10, 15 years ago, we could all assume that most kids, even if they weren't necessarily quote unquote Christian, had a basic concept of some of the main tenets of Christianity, because it was like, just out there. But now we can't assume that. And we also are facing the reality that these are students who are formed by hot takes on TikTok or Twitter, and used to having people tell them all the time, well, of course you can distill your argument down to 240 characters because that's what we do. And then walking into, like, as you become an adult, that reality of actually, ideally, no, but there's like, this kind of war of worlds, as it were, where we hope that our campuses especially are really kind of cultivating an idea of like, there's not going to be, like, all the good things in life don't actually have clear, easy answers. They're going to be living a life of community is messy, and you're going to have conflict. You can have someone who literally went to because I have a very close cousin, so family, who went to the same, middle school, high school, church, Whitworth with me, like all these things, and I love her dearly, and we're like best of friends, but we definitely don't agree on things, and that's about as like close of the duplicate pattern that you can create. And we still hold different beliefs. We would not agree on everything. So like, to expect that you can have hundreds or thousands of students coming in, not to mention the faculty coming in and being able to come to a single place of agreement that can be distilled down to 240 characters is like just ludicrous. But yet that feels like an expectation that students seem to have, or maybe a perception that I think students seem to think that they should have. But
yeah, I think that our students are less equipped today to even engage in conversations about orthodoxy. I think that term alone is probably a foreign term for many students. I'm not convinced that students are coming in, even our Christian students who might choose Samford because it's a Christian university. I'm not convinced that they're coming in with a biblical literacy, a theological literacy that we might have been able to depend upon, decades in the past. And so I think we need to meet our students at a very different place. Morgan, as you mentioned, our students' theology is largely formed these days by what's trending on Netflix and the latest meme, and in the things that grab the heart. Those are maybe not all bad things, but I'm not convinced that our students have the anchor, that like strong foundation of biblical literacy to even approach an idea of biblical orthodoxy. I've invoked the term orthodoxy here at Samford in several different ways, and in the midst of campus controversy and conversations that we're having. And that is not a respected term. And even reclaiming evangelicalism, reclaiming orthodoxy is something that's positive, that we benefit from, that we value the history of the church, the longstanding teachings of the church. These are important to us as Christians, but I think they're not as valued among the 18 to 22-year-olds that we serve largely today.
Yeah. Well, Beck, I want to stick with you here for a sec, because I'm thinking about when these conflicts arise, and we've kind of already touched on this a little bit, and you've even referenced it in your responses about how the conflicts that happen on campus don't stay on campus. And sometimes the conflicts that happen on campus actually come from outside of campus. And so for someone like you who's been in administration and as a president for quite a long time, how would you advise campus leaders to weigh and consider the input of groups beyond the students and faculty and staff they're invested in the campus community, they care about it, but they aren't involved in the day-to-day learning? And I'm going to group them all together, but feel free to separate them out if you want. But I'm thinking of people like donors, trustees, denominational leaders, if it's for institutions that are still closely tied to their denomination, parents, alumni, even prospective students and parents. How do you weigh all of these as a college administrator and president?
I will tell you candidly, this is one of the more frustrating parts of being an administrator these days. Long gone are the days of being a sleepy campus, where we could kind of depend on the close-knit and frankly kind of closed communities that colleges and universities often were, particularly when contending with difficult issues. This notion of having the bright light, if you will, shown on us as we try to deal with these very difficult issues is really one of the more challenging aspects of the job these days. And of course, I think very quickly I would point to the pervasiveness of social media, which now turns, what used to be relatively small events on our campuses into potentially kind of international media events. And I would say it does change the way institutional leaders like myself would deal with these things. In the past, we would deal with these controversies, these issues, these disagreements we might have. We might deal with them as a community, a close-knit community. That's how we want to continue to deal with them, I can assure you, as a community in faithful, loving, grace-filled relationship with each other, without the prying eyes of the world that too often doesn't have the first clue about what we're trying to do and teach on our campuses. But now, with the advent of having so many external constituents engaging in the issues of our campus today, the stakes are just that much higher for institutional leaders. And the peering eyes of the world prevent us sometimes from engaging issues or conflict in the healthy ways that we might have otherwise dealt with them in the past. So, for example, it is common now these days that parents of our current students will engage one another in various social media forums. Facebook, for example, will have a forum just for parents of Samford students. And by the way, I'm not picking on parents. Samford has some of the best parents in the world, but I know that these parents, they begin to chat on Facebook about a speaker or a topic of concern or a campus issue, and this kind of contagion of anxiety and criticism begins to build, and it can quickly derail an otherwise healthy opportunity to discuss a controversial issue or to host a speaker that might bring responsibly provocative thoughts or ideas, a discussion that isn't really intended to threaten an institutional position, but rather one that's intended to expose students to the kind of thinking that is pervasive in the world that they might encounter out beyond the gates of campus, to exercise the critical thinking that was discussed earlier so that our students can begin to discern what is truth and what is folly. I mean, the spotlight that is shown upon our campus. And I remember as an undergraduate student, Morgan, my parents had the slightest clue about what was going on my campus or the events or speakers that were that we're talking on my campus, or what the hot issue of the day is. And now I find that our families, our parents, and other external stakeholders, our alumni and others, they are very well equipped with information on what's kind of going on our campuses. And I do lament the days in which we might have been able to contend with these difficult issues as a smaller, more tight-knit community, without the big stakes, without the prying eyes, without the national media exposure, without the social media pressures that come. We know that these other interest groups now use our campuses as pawns in their bigger agendas to drive change. And so they very intentionally turn up the temperature. They intentionally, in my opinion, misrepresent that as these external constituent groups, these external interest groups. They intentionally misrepresent what's happening on our campuses in order to advance their particular agendas, and for no other purpose. They really don't care about what's happening on our campuses or the learning that can occur amidst healthy disagreement on our campuses. They're simply out for themselves. So I would say it's frankly just very hard to do in practice, but ideally, I think university leaders need to tune out as much as possible those voices and to really concentrate on their institutional missions and to serve their students well.
I was talking to our diversity officer earlier this year. Our language is Chief Intercultural Engagement Officer, is officially the name of the position. But she mentioned that I was asking her how things were going, and she remarked that she was surprised. He goes, "Why are so many people so interested in what I'm doing in my job here?" and of course, part of me is thinking, well, probably because people are telling them that your job, is some kind of domino towards, Wheaton College becoming some other thing. And then you hear about alumni. Well, I don't know what's going on. And whatever our institutions are, right? We probably all heard institutions that somebody said, what's going on at your school? What's going on at your institution? And then it gets perceived through a lens that's provided by someone else who isn't necessarily interested in actually knowing the facts. And I think that does create a tremendous challenge. And I do wonder, how does one discern, when do you say, newsflash, here's who we've been, which is who we are. So, you can exhale and direct your energy elsewhere. I mean, in a nice way, of course. And when do you just say, people are always going to have something to say, and you have to decide when to tune people out. So that, determining the calculus about that seems to be kind of an ongoing challenge, it seems.
Dr. Wong, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
I agree that somehow agitation seems to be more prevalent and common. And if we as Christ followers can help de-escalate that or prevent that from getting worse, again, I think we have gained grounds. And if we can help young people to think that way, and I think that would hopefully spread and slow things down or even turn things around.
And I do want to return to just think about, what the title of our conversation is about, the place of orthodoxy. I think there is the opportunity in these moments to, I guess, pivot and say, let me direct you to what our mission is and to what our curriculum is and what we do. And here's how we do what we do. In other words, here's what we're actually doing. So would you actually like to know what we're doing, or do you want to only articulate something through fear or speculation, or do you want to actually know what we're doing rather than letting someone else interpret for you what we're doing? And I do think that's perhaps an opportunity to help the external people, to the extent that they're actually interested in it, to actually see, hey, well, what is this place that I'm talking about? Because do you actually know what the mission of the institution is? Do you actually know how this institution talks about the way that its statement of faith functions for this community. Do you understand the strategies that we are taking to prepare students for a changing world, etc.? Are you aware of all those things and how, orthodoxy is an important driver, an important central, lodestar, if you will, for how all this is being navigated, as opposed to other worldviews or other things being the things that are determining that. I think that may be an opportunity in this midst. The challenge, of course, is actually getting people to exhale and to do that, because that requires taking time. That's maybe more time than just responding to, a meme, a TikTok, or someone saying "I heard," and then off it goes like gossip. But it's an opportunity nonetheless.
There is great opportunity to educate the broader public on who we are and what we're trying to do. I have an ongoing debate with our fabulous marketing and communications PR folks, and that is, as a university president, when one of these issues explodes or when a particular constituent group maybe seizes upon an area where they want to criticize the university, my kind of innate reaction to that, my instinct, is to want to respond and educate. I'm an educator, and to speak truth as I understand it into the situation. And of course, our fabulous marketing and communications folks are there saying, no, don't throw any more fuel on the fire. We want this story to go away. But I really think sometimes we don't use these opportunities to articulate, to demonstrate the kinds of values and institutional commitments that we have. And so when we discern opportunities to speak into these issues and to elevate orthodoxy and to celebrate orthodoxy on our campuses, I don't think we should be so quick to miss those opportunities just for fear of throwing fuel on the fire and extending the media cycle, as it were. I do think that we do have opportunities to educate. Now, not all of our constituents, not all of these external agitators are going to appreciate those efforts, but there may be some who would listen carefully to what we have to say and maybe come to a greater appreciation for what we're trying to do.
I guess it also does include the point that one has to keep in mind that universal affirmation is a quixotic right? So, but and to understand that, like, everybody's not going to agree with what you think about, right? The people who don't like you because you're a Christian, then they're the Christians because you're not their kind of Christian are going to have a problem, and unless you completely conform to that, they're not gonna. Most of them are not going to buy what you're selling, right? But they're not the only people. It's like I had to remind myself sometimes that if people complain about Wheaton College, I'll then have this moment where I encounter somebody that graduated 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and all they do is rave about their education. And I have to remember that way. There are a lot of people that they love what the institution is doing. And sometimes the noise of the other people can be a distraction from being aware of the fact that there are a lot of people that are saying, stay the course. We love the course that you're on.
In the immortal words of Taylor Swift, haters gonna hate, 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 hate.
I'm so glad Taylor Swift made it into our conversation.
I mean, it's the year, right? It has to. We got to keep it contemporary.
She made it into an event we had on campus last night, actually. Yeah.
I'm also of the millennial generation, so I have to represent.
Yeah.
Well, I could seriously keep going about this for hours, but I'm going to close with a question. There's the old adage, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I feel like at this point, it feels like there's no way that we can cure anything because, the bell has been rung and chaos is there. And as you kind of mentioned, Beck, like gone are the days of the ideal quiet campus. But I'm wondering, as we kind of look to the future, and obviously we can't know exactly what conflicts are going to arise. There's always a new one every year, every semester, every week. But what are things that, from your experience, like really practical things, one or two things from each of you that you think administrators or faculty could be thinking about, whether it's the coming weeks, coming months, maybe it's a kind of a shift in how we think about things, a new initiative, something about classroom, whatever it might be, that you think could be helpful for preparing your campus community. And here I'm thinking, again, bringing it kind of back to the main campus community, the students, the faculty, and staff, but it could also be maybe for some of those external communities we were just talking about, but helping them be prepared to whatever extent we can be prepared for theological conflicts that might arise in the future. Are there things that you think would be really helpful if we just started doing X or Y thing that may tone down the temperature at least slightly in some of these conflicts? Dr. Wong, I'll go ahead and start with you because I'm looking right at you on my screen.
I think it's so easy to get caught up in the frustration and the challenges of our times. So I have to always go back to Jesus's teaching. We are supposed to be in the world and not of the world. I sometimes think, can we just be whisked away? Can these all just go away? But time and time again, we're reminded we are here for a time such as this. And I really believe Christian higher education institutions have a very unique and important role to play in these days. Not just with conflicts, but I think really to have that really live out and lean into our value and tradition of community. I really think that it is very unhealthy to have difficult conversations out of vacuums, and to build relationships all along, and to have those kind of community that will allow for those difficult conversations to happen organically, not just because we are reactionary to certain things. Perhaps it is going to be worthwhile and helpful going forward. And I know I'm really busy, and we live in a very busy, hectic times. It is very difficult, but I think making time for conversations and building relationships and bridges instead of not, perhaps will go far.
One thing I would say is in a Christian college where you have a set of beliefs, and those beliefs are beliefs that everyone should at least know are there, irrespective of how clearly they can articulate them, to remind them that the opportunity is an opportunity for generosity towards other people in this moment, and that to give other people the benefit of the doubt that they would want for themselves. Because I think so often there is a climate of fear about, the sky is going to fall. And at the very least, Christians should be reminded that your people, even if you're on an open enrollment campus, at least the Christians can say, one of the interesting things about what we believe in a place like this is we believe in what happens on Easter, which means God wins. And if we really believe that, then that ought to inform however we're thinking about what we perceive as threatening us. In other words, we ought to be hopeful people, and reminding people that hope doesn't necessarily mean things are going to be easy in the moment, but it does mean, like a person who's reading a horror novel, what the end of the story is. That the evil is going to be vanquished, that's not going to win. And if that's what you're really believing, then that ought to be at least part of what you're reminding yourself of all the time. And if you can have that kind of a disposition, then you can't let fear be the driver. Fear is much less likely to be the driver if you're really letting hope be foregrounded in that way. That's one of the things that I would encourage people to think about. And just as Dr. Huang was saying, I think actually getting to know people, especially people that are not the people that are like yourself, and talking about things that are not the topics that are the subject of conflict, but ask them about their family, ask them about their hobbies, just go for a walk with somebody, go bowling with somebody, play tennis with somebody, do something like that, and you'll probably discover you might think that some of their ideas are just bonkers, but you really like this person. And then that will complicate the sort of simple ways that we look at people one-dimensionally. And then with that one-dimensional gaze, we dismiss people. But when they're more complicated, then we really have to think about how to treat them as three-dimensional complicated persons, but persons we've discovered, oh, there's really a lot I like about you. And I never thought I'd hang out with someone like you, but now here we are hanging out all the time.
So I think our institutions are at our best when we think of ourselves as bullseye rather than boundary organizations. And what I mean by that is we're at our best when we're focusing on the bullseye of our institutional missions, and that is the work and person of Jesus Christ. And we are distracted and often pulled off that mission when we're more concerned about the boundaries of our organizations and defining and policing those boundaries. I firmly believe that. But with that said, I do think, and this has been mentioned several times, I do think we as institutions would do a loving service to our constituents, whether they be prospective students and families, faculty, staff, current students, if we were to spend some time gracefully articulating what orthodoxy means for our campuses. And doing that in a way, as has been said, to practice graciousness, to practice intellectual and faithful humility, to practice loving our neighbor. But I don't think that nuance and subtlety are our friends these days. I do think it will benefit our campuses to the extent that we can spend just enough time thinking about what orthodoxy means on our campuses, and to do that, to frame that conversation in a loving, grace-filled way. The last thing that I would call us to is prayer, and that is, we will never fall short in our obedience to the Lord if we at the very first sight of trouble, at the very first tension that we experience, if we go to the Lord in prayer and pray for Christian unity, even amidst the controversy or disagreement that we may be having. In my experience, nothing pulls a fragmented community of Christians together quite like prayer. And so I don't think we can pray enough. I don't think we can pray enough as a community, particularly before and even when our campuses are navigating difficult issues. So calling us to prayer, I think, is something that we ought to practice a lot.
Amen to that. I think that's it's funny that you say that, because that's been coming up a lot, both in church and in other conversations I've had for work about the power of prayer and the centrality of it, and how easy it is to overlook when we think about the role of faith and learning integration on our campuses. So thank you once again, everyone, for joining us for this conversation. Like I said, it could go on for hours. I've already got about 6 other story ideas for future issues of Advance that could be talked about, because I think there's always something new that can pop up. But I really appreciate your perspectives. I think this is a small snippet of how awesome CCCU campuses are, how awesome our thought leaders are. And so I'm so grateful that you could be here today. Thank you. And have a good afternoon, I guess, for all of you who are tuning in. Afternoon, evening, morning, middle of the night. Hopefully you can go to sleep now if you're watching this in the middle of the night.